You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 178. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Are you stuck somewhere in your life and asking yourself how you got there? And now that you're there, are you trying to figure out how to find your way out? There are many areas in your life where you can feel stuck. You can feel career stuck, relationship stuck, house stuck, health stuck, money stuck, habits stuck. I wish I could say that as a coach, I've reached a point in my life where I no longer get stuck. But the truth is, I do. Everyone does. At any given time, there will be areas in your life where you are thriving and soaring and moving at lightning speeds, and there will be other areas where you simply feel stuck. And that is okay. In today's podcast episode, I am going to help you understand how it is that you got to be where you are and how to find your way out. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm thrilled to have you here and excited to dive into this conversation together. To begin, I'm going to share the 6 stages of how you got to be stuck, if you are indeed stuck. And then we're going to talk about solutions, ways to unstuck or unstick yourself. So beginning with the 6 stages of stuckness, we all start at stage 1. Now, stage 1 is this place where you are excited. There is a new beginning. This might be a new job for you. You're at the interviewing stage. You've decided you want a new job, or maybe you're just starting out in your career and you have your interviews for your first job. And what can happen here is you get so consumed by the excitement of the new that you ignore some red flags. Now, I'm going to be drawing examples today from my house stuckness because that is an area where I am currently stuck. So I've got a few gems that I'd like to share with you. And what that looked like for us is we moved into our current home about 11 years ago, I believe. And at the time it was a 5-year plan, a 5 to 7 year plan. So we could see that this house, cute as it is not really ideal for a family that is growing, that has children that are large. But when we moved in with a toddler and hoping to add another baby in the year to come, it was the perfect house, right? All the common living spaces were on the ground floor, bedrooms were upstairs. We could roll our stroller up to the front door and keep it there. Everything was all nice and dandy. But we could tell that after a few years, it would no longer be a suitable fit for our family. And the same can hold true when you go in for your job. You may know going into a job that it is a 5-year plan, right? That is not your forever job. And so you're going in there with this excitement, right? This feeling of anticipation. And you may notice that there are some red flags, but you tell yourself that those red flags don't really matter. So for example, you're interviewing at a firm and there's a billable target that feels beyond reach for you. It's something that you may be able to perform and achieve for a few years, but it may not align with your goals for the longer term. Or there's some red flags about the culture of the organization, or the type of work that you'll be doing isn't really what you want to be doing for the long run. And it may be even that there's nothing that you can put your finger on, but there's a spidey sense that you get when you speak with the people at the organization, when you're walking through the halls, when you're going through the interviews. And yet you're feeling so excited, you're feeling so energized that you choose to ignore the red flags and you press forward, which brings you to stage 2, which is energized and distracted by the new. So you can imagine when you are starting a new role, you are really focused on putting your best foot forward. You're hyper focused on the short term and what needs to be done, and you're not really thinking about the long term. Now, what can happen here is as you get familiar with your new surroundings, you might start to see some cracks, but you choose to ignore them because you have all this work to do, all this important work in front of you. Now, this is what happened when we moved into our house. We moved in, we were excited, and we could see the jobs to be done, right? We repainted a few of the rooms. We made a few minor renovations. We started to have the children, right? That well, not the children, we had an additional child. And so, we were building the house, or we adjusted the house, and we were excited about all the things that we were doing in the house, just in the same way that you are excited in those first few months, those first few years in your new position. So you're excited, you are learning all the systems, you're getting to know who's who in the zoo, you're working with your team, you're getting to know your assistant, you're figuring out who the clients are, you're building those relationships, and you're feeling really optimistic, right? You're so focused on the short term, you're not even thinking about the long term. You're gaining experience, you're forming relationships, you're integrating, and that feels like a success. Now, that leads you to stage 3, right? This is where you start taking on everything. So at this stage of your job experience, for example, you've laid that initial groundwork and now things are really starting to roll in, right? You're taking everything on. So if I think about the house example, this is where the kids are now toddlers, right? They are running through the house. We've got a nanny share going on with a very rambunctious young boy who's in the house. He's climbing all over the furniture. We're house-proofing or baby-proofing everything in the house. Our careers are really busy. We're really busy. The kids are really busy. And so we are just busy focusing on the day-to-day. We notice there's a lot coming in, right? There's new toys, there's new furniture. We've got to adapt to the different stages of the kids' lives. We have a pandemic that strikes and we change our situation. So I'm no longer working in an office. I decide to work from home. This actually happened pre-pandemic. And so you start to see sort of the wear and tear that's happening on the house. So at the beginning, we had these red flags. We noticed those at the beginning, at the interview stage and the early stages. Then we move into that stage 2 where we're so distracted by the new that we start to see maybe there are some cracks in the foundation. But again, we choose to ignore those and press forward. There's things to be done. And stage 3, we're really taking on everything. And in your professional work at your job, this may mean you're taking on all the work, right? All those initial efforts that you made to build relationships, they are resulting in lots of work coming your way, maybe some volunteer activities, some non-billable projects, some really difficult, thorny files, some outside commitments, and you start to take on so much that you begin to feel overextended, right? You notice that maybe you're starting to feel a little bit burnt out. You notice that those cracks start to feel much bigger than just cracks, and still you choose to ignore them and you carry on. And what you find is that you start waiting for things to get better, right? You start to think, okay, well, I'm taking on all these things, but someone's going to notice and it's going to get better. And I just need to keep my head down, keep working. I just need to finish this trial. I just need to get this deal closed. I just need to wrap up this giant settlement, whatever it happens to be. And then things will improve, which then leads you to stage 4, which is questioning, right? So you've gone through that initial stage, right? The excitement, the honeymoon, the red flags phase where they just don't seem to matter. You've moved into that initial excitement stage where you're integrating and you're super busy. You've moved into the stage where you're past integration. Now you're just really busy and things are going. And then you start to question, right? You're starting to think, wait a minute, I'm not so new around here anymore. And you're starting to notice that those little chips and cracks and flaws are starting to become more of a rupture. You notice that things aren't really working for you. You might start to feel like you're not really being valued. You're working really hard, and yet you don't seem to have the recognition that you want for your work. You might notice that your colleagues are passing you by. They are getting involved in more interesting files. They are having better opportunities and more chances for promotion. You might find that you're not working the same hours. So you may be working a lot of hours and taking on a lot of outside of the billable hour commitments, and notice that your colleagues are not doing the same. They seem to be moving at a more comfortable pace. Or maybe it's the inverse. Maybe everybody else is happily engaged and they've got lots of work and they seem excited and stimulated. And meanwhile, you're having trouble scraping together enough work to meet your targets. And other people seem happier than you. You're starting to wonder what's going on. And that can lead to that feeling of questioning, right? What is happening here? You may find that your work environment is actually lovely, right? That you love your colleagues, that you feel really valued, but the work that you're doing isn't aligned with your goals for the long term. Or what you might also find is that your relationships are souring. Sometimes you find yourself in an organization where, for whatever reason, the people that you work with most closely are people that you don't get along with very well, right? You might find that they are toxic relationships. You might find that they don't seem to like you. They don't seem to want you involved on their projects. And what happens there in this questioning phase is that more and more often you're starting to wonder if this is the right place for you. So this is what it looked like in our house at stage 4, right? We started to notice, things aren't really working, right? We started to feel like, a change was in order. This is around that 5 to 7 year mark. The house started to feel smaller and smaller. And, at a certain point, we stopped trying to make things pretty, right? We're just focused on survival, especially when we entered into that pandemic mode, right? You're just trying to go day to day. And meanwhile, it's like things are not improving around you. And so you start to question. And that leads you to stage 5, which I've coined the stewing phase, right? This is where you start to feel a lot of negative emotion about the environment in which you find yourself. So in the house, for example, there are a lot of negative thoughts that float around about the house, right? Those initial red flags, the signals that maybe this wasn't going to be the long-term solution. This was a 5 to 7 year plan. Those start to really highlight themselves, right? They go from being these tiny little flags to these big open gaping wounds. And even though you knew at the beginning that this was a 5-year plan, that those red flags at the time seemed so insignificant, you seem to have recalculated your strategy. You feel like, no, really, this should be a lifelong plan, right? You've had several years to be adjusting to your environment, to forming connections. In the case of a home, it's getting to know your neighborhood. Your kids are enrolled in the local school. It's a 1.5 block walk away. You're starting to feel really comfortable, right? Even though it's becoming increasingly uncomfortable, now you're starting to stew, right? And you start thinking, well, who has the energy to move? Especially when you look around and you think, with all this wear and tear, right? If you go back to that stage where you're just busy, right? You're not really thinking long term. You're just generating and getting through the day. Then you're questioning. You haven't really been focused on upkeep. And so you find yourself looking at the walls and there's chipped paint and some of the blinds are missing. We still do vertical blinds in the kitchen, and some of them have been pulled out by our children when they're toddlers. And, we didn't bother to fix them because we were so busy. We even stopped seeing them. And this is what it can be like for you in your job, right? You start to feel this sense of resentment, right? Maybe you start feeling increasingly like you're not being valued for the work that you're doing. And this can result in a shift in your attitude. You go from being super optimistic and thinking that you can create this amazing impact, that this is a role with so much potential, to feeling like what you're doing doesn't really matter. And what you can start feeling is this sense of pulling back, right? You might notice that you're isolating yourself more. You're not putting your hand up for new opportunities. You might find even that you start playing smaller. And what you might find is that you then start to feel a sense of stress and anxiety. You start to question your role within the organization. You might start to notice that you feel unhappy more often than you feel happy. You might notice that your confidence starts to drop, and you may have been telling yourself that everything's fine, and next thing you know, it's not fine. And because you've been telling yourself that it's fine, because you've been telling yourself not to worry, and now you find that you're increasingly unhappy, you might find that your relationship with yourself starts to feel like it's deteriorating, right? So you might feel like your confidence is dropping in the sense of you're not advancing professionally. You're not taking on stimulating new projects. You may feel like there's a stagnation of your skills development. And at the same time, your self-confidence, the trust that you have with yourself, may also feel like it is taking a hit, because here you are bringing yourself to work every day in a situation where you're not feeling truly aligned. You are questioning whether this is the right spot for you, and yet you are not doing anything for yourself to change it. And what this can result in is that you then feel this increased sense of not really having options. You might feel like your confidence is really waning, and then you might feel scared to leave, right? You might think about all your files and who's going to take over your files, and what else could you do, right? When you're not feeling confident, when you're not feeling valued at work, it may be hard for you to see how you could feel valued in a different environment, how you could really thrive somewhere else. And you may feel like your workspace, your files have become so messy even that how could you possibly leave that for somebody else? And this is what it's like in the home, right? If I think about the stage of the house, right? I mentioned, the blinds start getting pulled out and there's chips on the walls. And, when it comes to thinking about, okay, well, who else could move in here? And you realize there's no way that someone could just step in. It's not move in ready. It needs work. And so that in itself can feel overwhelming, right? With your job and with your home, right? It's like, okay, what are we going to do next? And that's where you end up in that feeling of being stuck, right? There's this feeling of overwhelm. Like there is so much that you need to do that it's almost like you don't know where to start. And if this is you in your job situation, you might be hoping that somebody else can come in and solve it for you. But what you might notice is that nobody else is coming to fix this for you. And you might feel like you're neither here nor there, right? You don't know where to take your career. You find that your confidence continues to drop, right? As you feel increasingly disengaged, you might start to notice that others may seem not as engaged with you either. And your relationship with yourself continues to suffer as you force yourself to carry on in a situation that you really don't like. And yet here you are talking yourself into staying, convincing yourself that this is your only option or your best option. And it may even be that other people reinforce that belief, right? They make you feel like you should feel lucky because you have this great job. There's nothing objectively wrong with it. And hey, look at what else is out there on the market. Like this is really good. You should be happy. And so then you start shaming yourself into thinking, well, I should be happy where I am. And you develop this fear of leaving. So this is how you get stuck. And if we just go back and review those 6 steps, it really does start with that exciting new beginning, right? You start in a new role. Everything feels great and exciting and new. You're full of optimism. And yes, there's a few red flags, but they don't really matter. Then we move into that energized and distracted by the newness, right? That integration phase, you're meeting people, you're getting to know the systems, you're starting to feel like part of the team. And there's all this optimism about what lies ahead. Then you're taking everything on, right? And you're getting so busy and yeah, you're starting to notice there's a few problems here, but you're still so focused on doing a great job and building things out. And yeah, you're starting to feel a little bit burnt out, but that's okay. Things are going to get better. The trial is going to go away and then you'll be able to move forward. Then you end up in that phase where you're at stage 4, you start to question, right? That little voice is coming up from time to time, but you're kind of hush, we're okay. We'll just keep going. Everything's fine. Then you reach that point of stewing, right? That's where you've got those negative emotions. I know for myself at the stewing phase, that's where I have a really hard time shaking the negative thoughts. I like to run in the mornings. If I am really perseverating over something, it's usually the first half of my run. I'm thinking about it. It's like this thought loop. It just won't go away. Maybe you can relate to that. And then finally, you find yourself feeling stuck, right? That's where you truly feel like you're in a position you don't know what to do. The idea of leaving seems pretty terrible. The idea of staying seems pretty terrible. And so you simply stay put, the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. So what do you do if you're in that situation? Well, here's where we have some leverage. And the first thing that I would like to share is that if you relate to any one of these stages, if you are not truly stuck where you are, but maybe you're at that initial stage and you're noticing some red flags, there may be points of purchase along the way where you can avoid getting stuck in the first place. So it might be addressing those red flags at the outset. If you are in a further on stage, right? Maybe that integration stage or that playing full out stage where you're so distracted by building that you're not putting up boundaries, you're taking on all of the things. Maybe there's opportunities there for you to be more discerning when it comes to setting boundaries, when it comes to taking more control over the direction of the work that you choose to get engaged in. If you are noticing that there are problems that are revealing themselves to you, you may choose to address those problems head on. That might mean having really uncomfortable conversations with colleagues, with clients, and yet having those conversations is an opportunity to fix those problems. And finally, if you find yourself in a position where it just doesn't feel right to you, right? Maybe you started a new role and you expected it to be one way and it's completely different from what you expected, you may want to give yourself permission to leave. I know for some people, they have a rule of thumb. They want to stay somewhere for at least a year so that they don't have to explain on their CV why it is they've gone from job A to job B to job C or whatever that happens to be. And so you might just question that and ask yourself whether staying for a certain amount of time truly makes sense, or if you're better simply moving forward. And so these are all considerations for how you might avoid getting stuck in the first place. But if you do find yourself stuck, I have a number of suggestions for you. I have 6 altogether. The first is I would encourage you to check out the episodes I've recorded in this podcast series that address the idea of getting stuck. I've recorded a number of them, and we will link to them in the notes that accompany this podcast episode. It'll be on the webpage. And I will refer specifically to a couple of them in this podcast episode. And the idea here is to start generating ideas for yourself about what you can do if you feel stuck, some of the decisions that you might be making, some strategies that you might incorporate. So there is more available within the podcast series to help you get unstuck. Now, the second thing that I would recommend that you do is to get lots of in-person support. Now, by in-person, this could be virtual, Zoom or telephone support, or actual 3D in-person support. And what I'm getting at here is I would invite you to get out of your own head. If you're stuck, my guess is that there is a thought loop that is going on internally. As a lawyer, you love to think and you have a creative, beautiful imagination. And my guess is that that imagination is being used to regenerate and recreate some of the same thinking that is keeping you stuck. So what we want is for you to have external perspectives, opportunities for you to share your thoughts with others so that you can start to externalize those thoughts and evaluate them for what they truly are. So a couple of ideas. Number 1, I would recommend retaining professional support. So a counselor and or a coach. If you have access, and you may have access to free counseling through your employer. You may have free counseling available to you as a lawyer through a local organization. I know in British Columbia, the Lawyers Assistance Program offers free counseling to lawyers and people who are associated with lawyers, law students and staff, and even family members, I believe, of lawyers. And so you'll want to avail yourself of support. And counselors are great. Coaches are great. And the reason that I recommend reaching out to somebody, a professional, is that first of all, you will be paying them to help you solve your problems. And so it removes the expectation of reciprocity with that person. So for example, when my clients reach out to me for help, I am 100% focused on them. There is no expectation for them to ask me how I'm doing or carry their end of the conversation in a way that is at all focused on me. We are exclusively focused on them. That is exactly the deal. That is exactly what they sign up for. And some clients have even told me, right? I've spoken to my spouse about this. I've spoken to my friends about this. I really just want someone who I can pay to listen to me, to help me solve this problem, because I don't want to exhaust my friends and family with this thing that I'm struggling with. So I think for that reason alone, it is already a really great idea to engage somebody who can help and support you with the problem that you're having. Now, there are many other reasons to reach out to a professional, including they are impartial, right? They have no vested interest in you making one decision or another. And that may not be the case if you are speaking with somebody, even a family member, a mentor, somebody who has a particular vision of what they want for you in your future. It may also be that you want somebody who is confidential, right? If you're speaking with a coach or a counselor, the relationship is confidential. So you know that you can say those things out loud that maybe you don't feel comfortable sharing with anybody else. And that can reveal to you some of the things that you may not even realize that you were thinking. Now, the other sources, so that would be one resource, would be to find yourself really good support, whether it's a counselor and or a coach. I would also recommend reaching out to family and friends, right? You're going to want to have your support network, right? And you can rely on them to help you be accountable. I wouldn't recommend telling them, listen, you need to check in on me in 6 months and make sure I've done something about this. But you might say to them, listen, I'm giving myself a timeline of 6 months and I'm going to check back in with you then and, tell you where I'm at, right? So you make that external commitment that can help you get motivated to move forward. And I recommend trying not to make this the focal point of all of your conversations together. Now, I say this and I have conversations with my mom all of the time. She was on podcast episode 100. She is an amazing support in my life. I love speaking with her and I tell her everything. And it really feels wonderful and validating to be able to speak with her. And yet at the same time, I try not to always talk about those things with her because I don't want to wear out that relationship. I don't want to overburden her with my problems. And so you might just be thinking about that in terms of your relationships with friends and family. You might also reach out for mentors and sponsors, whether they're within your organization or outside of your organization. And it may be that there is potential within your organization to make changes, right? That will help you to make changes where you're at in order that you can really thrive. And then finally, you might think about whether there are people within management, right? Sometimes one of the reasons why you're stuck at work is maybe there's an HR question and it could be resolved. So in addition to counselors and coaches, friends and family, mentors, colleagues, management, you might also think about courses that you could take that would help you to lift your mood and help you gain an additional perspective. So these may be courses that are specific to professional development. I run a 6-month program for women lawyers. We focus on leadership. We focus on goals. And so this would be a wonderful container for you to explore a feeling of stuckness, for example. But it doesn't have to be exclusively a career-oriented program. It could be an art class or a language class or something that simply gets you out of your day-to-day and invites you to think about things from a different perspective. So step 1 was listen to some of the podcast episodes I've already recorded on the topic of stuckness. Step 2 is to get lots of in-person support. Step 3 is to identify what is within your control and to start setting goals with deadlines. So here's what I recommend here. So bringing it back to the house project, what I would invite you to do is to think about what you can control, right? There are a number of things that will be beyond your control, but what is within your control and what can you do that is going to help you gain momentum and traction toward ultimately making a decision? So when I think about the house project, I have chosen that I am going to do everything in my power to get our house ready by the end of the school year. So I figure we missed the window in the summer to sell our house. And the next opportunity to do so would be in the summer, right? Right now, our kids are in school. I don't want to move them during the school year. I love the location that we're at for that purpose. But by the end of June, I want to be in a position where we can either love it or list it. Now, I take that expression, love it or list it, from a TV series that was popular, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, where the premise of the show is that you would have a couple or a family living in a house, and the house, like our house, had it had lost its functionality. It was no longer the ideal house. And the people living there engaged in a project where they would renovate the house. So they would try to fix the house, whatever it was that wasn't working. So for example, if the living room was too small, they would renovate to create a larger living room, or they would move out of the house. So they had a budget for the renovations, and they also had a budget for what houses they might be able to move into. So they had a person who was on site doing home renovations. I believe it was Jillian Harris who was doing the renovations. And then she had a colleague, a realtor, who was showing the couple, showing the family what they could afford that was within their price range. And at the end of the project, the end of the renovations, after the couple, the family had seen the different houses, they would choose. They would either love it, i.e. they would stay within the house that they had originally with the improvements, or they would list it and move into a new house. And I would invite you to take that same concept and apply it to the situation that you are in where you are stuck, right? If you're in a job, you may be able to change that job in a way that you love it and choose to stay, or you make it as good as you possibly can and you decide to list it. And if this is a concept that resonates with you, then I would encourage you to listen to my podcast episode 174. It's a relatively recent podcast where I talk about how to thrive at work while exploring your options. So if I look at my house example, right? Here we are in the house, and I've chosen to engage in this project, my own little love it or list it project. What I've done here is I've created a roadmap, right? If you've ever closed a deal, so I was never a solicitor, but I've seen closing agendas because I used to do court work for a certain type of transaction. And I was always impressed at how the solicitors would set out these multi-page documents, and every step of a transaction would be listed. Each of those steps had a deadline, and it was assigned to a specific person. And so that is what I've done for our house project. So there are all these projects, 4 pages of projects. And what I've been doing over the past several weeks is knocking off the to-do items on my list. So that project has included a reorganization of the way that we've distributed the bedrooms. It has involved getting new blinds. So those vertical blinds that were pulled off by our toddlers, I found replacement blinds and we've put up the new blinds. There were broken blinds in the master bedroom. I've replaced those. There was a horrendous toilet seat in the master bedroom. Truth be told, I had cracked when I was pregnant. I sat on our old toilet seat and cracked it. I guess I was really heavy at the time. And my husband replaced it with whatever he could find. And it was the worst toilet seat ever. And I couldn't stand looking at it. So the other week, I replaced a toilet seat. I never thought I would be in the small section of the population that knows how to do that. But I feel kind of like I'm in the secret society of people that can change a toilet seat. And with every single step, with every little project, every blind that we're replacing, every little item that gets checked off that list, I feel closer to a solution. I feel closer to that love it or list it moment. And I would invite you to take an inventory of your practice and do exactly the same thing. There are opportunities for you. There are broken blinds. There are vertical blinds that have gone missing. There are things that are the equivalent in your practice right now that you can fix, and it will make you feel so powerful, and it will allow you to start taking back control. So look at your files and see where there are opportunities for you to clean up your existing files. Maybe you want to rebuild your relationships with different members of your team at the office. Maybe you want to start building more allies where you are. Maybe your firm, your organization is great. You're just not in the right practice group and you want to find a way to move into a different group. Maybe you've taken on way too much non-billable work and you want to redistribute some of that work. Maybe you've lost enthusiasm when it comes to profile building and you want to jump back into profile building, start raising your profile within your organization and start getting more involved in extracurricular activities. So there are all these different ways where you might be able to start really redefining your role within your organization, building yourself back up, gaining that momentum so that by the end of it, you're either loving where you are or you're ready to list and move somewhere else. So again, if you're interested in some strategies specific to your role, that would be episode 174, where you'll have some tips on how to really thrive where you are while exploring your options. And that brings us to step 4, which is to explore what your options are. So we haven't got there yet with our house, but in the summer, we will be exploring all the different options that are available to us. In the past, I have had this experience when I chose to leave law. So I was exploring my options for a number of years. I was moving toward the goal of figuring out what I wanted to do career-wise. I was debating whether to be a coach full-time, whether to maintain a practice on the side, whether to be a lawyer who just happened to have coaching capacity. So there were all these different iterations of what it was that I could be moving toward. And it took me time to ultimately evaluate all of my different options and then decide on which option to choose. So this isn't something that necessarily happens overnight. And for you, I would invite you to learn about what your options are for the transition that you may have ahead. So what does that look like? It may involve a lot of research, a lot of networking, seeing who else is out there, seeing what other lawyers are doing, lawyers perhaps who have your background, who have your interests. It may require looking at job boards. It might involve looking at success stories for other lawyers. It might be looking at recruiters. So reaching out to recruiters, talking to them, seeing who would be really good to work with, what types of opportunities they see for you. And what this will help you do by exploring your options, what you will see is that you're not stuck, right? That you can change your situation, that other people have done it. And yes, there may be pros and cons to moving from where you are to moving to somewhere else, but this is going to loosen the grip the stuckness has on you right now. So that is step number 4, is exploring your options. So just to recap, if you are not feeling stuck yet, but you see yourself in some of the stages that I've described, you may still have points of purchase where you can avoid getting stuck in the first place. But if you are already stuck, I would encourage you to listen to the podcast episodes in this series to help generate ideas on what you can do. I would encourage you to get lots of in-person support. So find a counselor, find a coach, find someone who can help you at a professional level to move away from where you are right now. Your friends, your family, mentors, sponsors, whoever it is that is going to be your support network as you move forward, whether you stay or go. Number 3 was to get clear on what's within your control and to set some goals and set some deadlines and start working toward those goals and deadlines. Again, if you take that approach, like that step by step, here's my closing agenda, here are all the things that I can fix in what is effectively your house in order to make it beautiful. So you can either walk away and somebody else can walk in, or you choose to stay there. Those are the things that you want to do. And then you want to step 4, explore your options. Know that you are not stuck where you are, that there are lots of options available to you. I also have a podcast episode about career options for lawyers. I don't have the number reference handy, but you're welcome to listen to that episode as well. And that brings you to step 5. And this is a step where I invite you to return to yourself. So if you find yourself in a position of stuckness, then chances are you are living a life where you are feeling out of alignment a lot of the time, especially if this is your professional work, right? You're going in, you're not feeling right. That is a lot of time for you to be spending in that questioning state, in that unhappy state. And so you may need to go back to basics, go back to who you are and re-identify what it is that you truly want. Look at what you want right now, not what you wanted 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but what do you want today? And what do you think you're going to want in 5 years, in 10 years? And as you're getting to know yourself and reconnect with yourself, I would invite you to think about where it is that you have been denying yourself what it is that you truly want. I would invite you to think about where you may need to rebuild trust with yourself. So if you have been persuading yourself to stay in a role where you know that you're not happy, where you know that you don't see yourself having a future, then you may have undermined the relationship that you have with yourself. And so how can you go about rebuilding that relationship? It may be that you've been undervaluing yourself, right? It may be that you've been putting up with situations that fall below the standards that you want to have for yourself, whether it is the type of work that you're doing, the opportunities for promotion that are not there. It may be the way that you're treated within your organization, right? It may be that there are boundaries that you're not setting. It may be that you're not going after your dreams and your goals and your big aspirations because you're doubting your ability to achieve your goals. And as you do this exploration, ask yourself what can and will be different for you. And one of the ways to explore this question of what you want and is to access your inner wisdom. I think we all have inner wisdom that we carry with us that we often don't have access to. We just don't know how to tap into it. There are ways to do that. One of the ways is to channel your inner mentor. I have a whole podcast episode that is dedicated to that. It's episode 128. So you might listen to that episode and reconnect with that part of you that knows what you want, that is honest with you, that is telling you the truth about what you truly want. Another way to do this is to imagine yourself in the future and to ask yourself questions about how you got there. So imagine that you succeed in the goals that you have and it's 5 years out, 10 years out. What can you learn from that future version of you who has achieved those things? And then finally, you want to gain that clarity, right? Through all this questioning and self-exploration, you'll gain clarity and vision about what it is that you want, and that will guide you going forward, right? As you make your next move. So that brings you to step 6 then, which is ultimately to make a decision and then follow through on that decision. Now, if I had to guess, if you are feeling really stuck, if what we're talking about here today resonates with you and you're nodding your head and you're thinking, yeah, you're describing exactly what it is that I'm going through, then chances are you already know that the answer to your question may be that you do need to move on. It may be that there are things you can do to improve the place that you are in. So yes, we can paint the walls in my house. And yes, I'm going to change the vanities in the bathroom. Yes, I'm going to feel really great at the end of the day because the house will look different. But it may be that even with all those improvements, it simply isn't going to be sustainable for the goals of the future, for me, for our family. And so you might ask yourself, even if you were to improve everything in the situation that you're in, is there really a viable future there for you? And it may be that the answer is no. In which case, it may require that you make that decision, that you are going to move on, and then you're going to want to give yourself a timeline, right? Give yourself a timeline that feels comfortable, but not so comfortable that you continue to put it off, because that is how you will continue to feel that sense of stuckness. And you'll want to follow through on that promise that you make to yourself. Again, going back to that relationship that you have with yourself, you want to maintain that accountability with yourself. So you might not like the idea of doing that, right? It might feel really uncomfortable. It might feel really uncertain. Even if you're uncomfortable right now, there's that uncertainty that comes with making changes. You might feel a lot of attachments, right? Just like in this home, we have neighbors that we know, there's the local grocers, there's a school nearby, there's all the happy memories of the kids pulling the blinds off of the windows, all of it, right? And to let that go, it feels like a loss. It feels hard. And so even if you're not entirely happy where you are, there may still be a lot of grief as you're moving forward. And so part of the transition is accounting for the fact that you may feel really sad. You may feel like you're losing something. And that's why you'll be so glad that you have that support in place, those people who can help you, who can remind you of why it is that you're making this decision. You may need to give yourself permission, right? You may be fighting with yourself and telling yourself, no, you just need to stick it out. Things are going to get better. You may need to change that internal narrative with yourself and allow yourself to move forward. Give yourself the permission that maybe you're seeking from others. You may need to feel gratitude, right? If you're feeling really resentful right now and all you can see are the negative things around you, you may want to find that place in your heart where you can shift from feeling resentful and angry to grateful for all the wonderful memories, all the experiences, all the relationships, all the things that were really wonderful about your time in your current role that are things that you are going to miss when you move forward. And then finally, you'll want to pull the lessons, right? What were those red flags that maybe you would have acted on? What were those cracks in the foundation that maybe you would have addressed sooner? What are some of the conversations that you may be more forthcoming in having at your next space? So you want to really wrap it up almost like with a bow so that you can close a chapter. We're not looking at this experience and saying that you failed because you're leaving your job. Rather, what we're doing is we're looking at how we are closing the chapter. We've reached completion of one phase of your career, one phase of your life, and now you are ready to move on. And as you're moving on, you're doing so as a different person. You are a wiser, more experienced, maybe even more evolved version of who you are as a person relative to who you were when you first started that job. You know, we're much, much different as a family than who we were when we first moved into our house. And that growth happened in these four walls. You might think about all the growth that has happened as a result of being where you are, and also seeing how you are ready to fly the coop or leave the nest, whatever that expression happens to be. And you may find that as you get closer to that goal, as you get closer to that opportunity, that next transition, you may even start to feel a little bit excited about what is next to come. So, my dear friend, thank you so much for joining me for today's podcast episode. I've really enjoyed having this conversation with you. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be able to talk about this stuckness and moving forward. And I really do hope that whatever stage you're at, you have found some takeaways, some actionable takeaways that can help you to start feeling more in control, that can help you to start taking those steps, right? Finding those points of purchase where you can feel more empowered, where you can build that momentum so that you no longer feel like you're stuck, so that you can choose your next move from a position of power with an exciting and open vision for what is available for you next. So thank you, my friend. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to reconnecting with you again next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.